the central bank community would be able to do what they did in the past for the 2019 euphoria, which is basically saving the world. The Fed paused the normalization after the first hike in December 2015. The ECB increased the unorthodox toolkit, and the BOJ did exactly the same in July with increasing the ETF purchase. Then you have the what I call the Minsky moment, which is the 3rd of October, when Jerome Powell, in fact, declares that rates are far from neutral. And from that point, it has been just a very, very painful quarter until the end of the year and the paroxysm, which was on Christmas Eve. My name is Christophe Ollary. I have designed about something like 3 years ago a global macro research, multi-asset class and multi-currency. I did that after 20 years trading in banks and the hedge fund community. When I came last June, and we already sensed that the prevailing environment was relatively toxic, and we saw some rising fears and threats creeping at the surface. The first one was a nascent trade escalation between the US and China. Then we had also the synchronous growth downturn gaining some momentum, led by China and Europe, with the usual raising concern when we talk about China, which is the potential hard landing of the economy. We had, of course, the big elephant in the room, which was the Fed, determined to pursue the dual tightening and normalization of the very easy monetary policy. On one side, continuing the Fed fund hikes. On the other side, ongoing runoff of the balance sheet. I think that there was another dynamic which was very important as well, which was a consequence of the strong dollar, but also of the trade war. Its pressures on the emerging market central banks that were facing a cruel dilemma. It's either supporting the economy, taking the risk to see inflation and their own currency collapsing with the threat of the capital in flight, or just deciding to some extent, sacrifice the economy in order to support the currency. This is a choice that most of the EM central banks made. Turkey, Argentina, Indonesia, Russia, India decided to hike, which in fact contributed to amplify the global tightening of the financial conditions. So that was the main threat in when we met last June. And what has been the rest of the year? It has been, in fact, the confirmation that it was not only a narrative, but it was proper risk. And everything just shifted into a much more, I would say, Armageddon scenario at the end of September and at the beginning of October, with 3 very important dynamics. The first one, on the 24th of September, the US administration has applied the 200 billion of tariffs on the Chinese goods. Why it's so important? It's for the first time, the trade war narrative becomes a reality. Then you have, early October, a dual process. First of all, the runoff of the balance sheet of the Fed moves from 40 billion a month to 50 billion a month. This is happening after a hike in September at the FOMC on the 20th of September. And at that meeting, the Fed is already communicating that there will be another hike in December. Also, early October, you have the ECB, which is halving their monthly buybacks from 30 billion to 50 billion, and announcing that the end of the monthly buyback will happen early January. What does it mean? It means that early October, for the first time since GFC, the monthly flow of the central bank is becoming negative. We had a very quick episode early 2015, but it didn't last as the ECB stepped in very aggressively. So you had that dual dynamic, which was extremely disruptive for the market because on one side, the trade war is a reality. On the other side, we can say that the central bank's largest, which has been the trademark of the past 10 years, is over. Then you have the what I call the Minsky moment, which is the 3rd of October. I qualified that as a rookie chair mistake when Jerome Powell, in fact, declares that rates are far from neutral. We know what happened. 3rd of October, it's almost the top of all the US equities markets, and it's the peak of oil, it's the peak of the break-evens, and from that point, it has been just a very, very painful quarter until the end of the year and the paroxysm, which was on Christmas Eve. In fact, it was very interesting because one of the fear in June as well, it's people were already sensing that the Fed was maybe about to do too much and raising the risk of the monetary policy mistake. And I think that the Fed has underestimated the impact of the dual tightening, but also we see why the summer was a very misleading period because of the strength of the US equities. The US financial conditions were artificially very loose. And also because the trade war was just a narrative. In fact, it didn't bite the economy. And in fact, what we saw, it's manufacturers just front-running the tariffs and building up inventories, which artificially give the sense that the economy was still okay. In fact, as soon as the tariffs have been applied, we saw that the economy and China, Europe, and then the US were starting to roll over. So we went, the scenario, the nightmare scenario ended on Christmas Eve. And again, we have the dynamic we are talking about with the Fed, with the ECB, with the trade war. But as well, don't forget that people since November were waiting for the Santa Claus rally. And everybody was talking about a positive outcome at the G20 in Buenos Aires. The Fed in November gave the sense that maybe they were trying to rectify the communication. But then we had the FOMC in December, where Powell gave a very hawkish performance. So poor liquidity, CTS going out, flushing out all the last of the Mohicans. And then on the 24th of December, in what I would describe as a liquidity vacuum sell-off, Armageddon. So we start the year and we end 2018 in a very sore note. And then early January, you have the first pivot of the Fed, which is completely just reversing the hawkish message of the FOMC in December. And this is very important because we have learned in 2018 that the Fed is giving the tempo to everyone. So by becoming extremely dovish in January, by shifting its communication, in fact, it forced, to some extent, all the other central banks to lean even more dovish for one reason. In the current environment of trade jitters, of deteriorating inflation and growth outlook, nobody wants a strong currency. So you had that succession of very dovish comments from starting with the Fed, then the ECB, the RBA, the Bank of Canada. So they all just went for you know what, we need to reflate the whole system. Then, of course, we had some positive news on the trade side with determination to at least just stop, pause the escalation, but more importantly, maybe to find an agreement and to properly sit at the negotiation table. The third extremely powerful catalyst was, of course, the multiple announcements from China about new measures in order to reflate the economy and to kickstart the credit stimulus and trying to basically kickstart the moribund economy. So we had RRR cuts, we had various measures and new measures like the issuance, the supply of perpetual bonds against central banks T-bills in order, again, to do what China was doing in the past, trying to kickstart the credit stimulus. Also, Very importantly, we ended up 2018 with CTAs short, and especially on the Russell 2000, and which is not surprising that one of the leaders of the rally in January has been the Russell. And the active community was basically not positioned for any rally. So very global low positioning. So what I found extremely interesting in the rally and in the current dynamic since the beginning of the year, its sentiment has just completely reversed. And it's based on the fact that China will be able to do what they did in the past, which is boosting the credit creation and with the usual ripple effect on the world economy. So successful reflation from China. On the other side, it's successful negotiation between the US and China. So good, positive outcomes on the trade war. And then a central bank community determined to not only wait and see and be patient, but I think more importantly, already seen as easing further. We are pricing cuts, almost 15 bips in the next 14 months on the Fed side. For the RBA, we are pricing 25 bips of cut in the next 1 year. So this is a very, very powerful mix. We are hoping that reflation will work and be, to some extent, ignored and welcomed by the central banks, and they will even fuel that reflation by cutting. So I think it reminds me, to some extent, what we had in 2009 and 2016. And this is why I've got some reservations and wondering if that QE is not the old quantitative easing, but it may be more questionable euphoria. Let's start with one of the dynamic, which is the made in China reflation. So as mentioned before, we had multiple announcements about various measures in order to kickstart the economy. The reality for now is we haven't seen any tangible result. When they did it in 2009, the velocity of M2 had jumped from 15% to 35%. When they did it in 2016, it jumped from 10% to 16%. We are still stuck to the all-time lows, around 8%. So the question is the old transmission model still working? Or maybe the truth is somewhere else? Are we misled by the real intentions of Beijing? I think we need to keep in mind that the target for Beijing is to move from the old growth model, which was capital accumulation and heavy industrialization, to something a bit more balanced, aiding toward an economy led by the domestic consumption and export of services. And I think that the best way to look at it is, despite all these measures, industrial production has printed a 17 years low in February, and fixed asset investment have not moved and are still stuck to 4 decades low. Another way to look at it, it's usually in the past, when China is pushing on the credit stimulus pedal, the Aussie dollar is celebrating. The Aussie dollar is correlated right now to the industrial production and to fixed asset investment. Is not believing the reflation story. And this is very interesting. When you put copper, for example, and Aussie dollar, you see the divergence. So who is lying or who is wrong? And my guess is the reflation made in China will not lead necessarily to a big boost of the commodities complex, because the nature itself of the growth targeted by China will be less commodities consuming. The bottom line is, we are not talking about the ability of China to reflate the economy. I think the bottom line is, even if they succeed, it's not going to be as deflationary as it was in the past, which has obviously a very key consequences. First of all, it puts on the spotlight economies who are very dependent of the old growth model from China. First one, of course, Australia. Australia was exporting 5% of their goods to China in the early 2000s. Now we are above 30%. And it's highly dependent of the heavy industrialization model of the past. So what is left to Australia? It's a business model which is not adequate anymore, very leveraged household, falling housing market, domestic banks who are just moving mortgages higher, so it's a very unstable setup. The second casualty that I see, it's Europe as well. I think that we need very quickly to go back to 2016, 17, 18, because I think that it's the crux of the matter. In 2017, everybody praised what we call the revival of the European Phoenix. Of course, the improvement of the political scene was important after the elections of Macron. But I think that the reality of the boom, European boom in 2017 is somewhere else. We can find it in early 2016 when China, and after the Shanghai Accord, decided to go full on the credit stimulus. And there is a lag of 1 year between when China starts to stimulate and the impact on the global economy. And with a very important impact on the open economies like Germany. What happened in 2017? China has completely reversed its approach. The target now is not to reflate the economy, the target is to deleverage the shadow banking system. So basically what they did, they just stopped and pushed on the brakes. 2018 downturn in Europe is not caused by the trade war. It's a consequence of the reversal of the monetary policy and fiscal expansion of Beijing early 2017. So you would expect that, considering the numerous headwinds in front of the European economy, a less successful reflation made in China will be another major headwind for Europe. The other, indicator which talks to me a lot, it's what is another somewhere weakest link in the European area, not the EU, but the European market. It's Sweden. Sweden, which is extremely dependent as well from Germany. So it means extremely dependent from the reflation made in China. So Germany, interestingly enough, has become the weakest link, and which is quite ironical compared to, the old belief that the weakest link of Europe was the 1,000 countries. That brings us to one of the second catalysts for the 2019 euphoria. It's the central bank community will be able to do what they did in the past, which is basically saving the world. Remember what they did in 2008 after the bankruptcy of Lehman. Remember what they did in 2016 as well, because we talk about China, but the Fed paused the normalization after the first hike in December 2015. The ECB increased the unorthodox toolkit, and the BOJ did exactly the same in July with increasing the ETF purchase. So they've been crucial in the reflation story. Where are we compared to that period? We tend to forget that in 2008, if we put on the side the SNB and the BOJ, most of the official rates were north of 4%. We are far away from the same situation. The accumulated balance sheet of the Fed, the ECB, and the BOJ in 2008 was 4 trillion and 10 trillion in 2016. We are north of 14 trillion. So which means that there is a reality. There is not as many AMOs, obviously compared to 2008, but also compared to 2016. To some extent, this is what we saw at the last meeting of the ECB. It's the question, what can we do? Because, of course, there is no room to normalize because the economy is too weak, and the ECB is one mandate central bank, which is inflation, and there is no scope to normalize considering the inflation outlook. On the other side, where do we go? Do we go further down the rabbit hole of the unorthodox monetary policies and looking like more and more the BOJ? Or do we try to find a quick fix and hope that things will get better? And this is, to some extent, this is the irony of the last set of decisions. The ECB is conscious and aware of the pernicious effects of the negative interest rate policy on the banking profitability, which means as well impacting the ability of the banking system to fulfill their most important role, which is providing credit to the real economy. But what did they do, in fact? They extended the forward rate guidance until 2019, which is more NIRP for longer, which is counterproductive. But do they have more at their disposal for the time being? I would expect they have, but I think that we will need further deterioration of the macro outlook to see them going that way. We saw that, obviously, I don't think that there is any meaningful reflation possible with a strong dollar. And one of the catalysts of the rally at the beginning of the year as well, and I forgot to mention it, it's, of course, a 5 consecutive streak of negative weekly performance of the US dollar, which was basically another boost to the euphoria, especially in a world where the global liquidity in dollar is still a concern, and where, in fact, the debt denominated in dollar is at an all-time high. We started the year with a very consensual trade everywhere. It's the short dollar. And I always mention to my customers, I've got a big issue with that, because people who are advocating for a dollar weakness forget to tell us what to buy against it. It's good to set the dollar, but what is available, especially within the G10? And for one main reason, there is still a diverging growth momentum between the US and the rest. Secondly, any dovish move from the Fed is to some extent offset by the need for the rest of the central banks to lean even more dovish. They don't want to appreciate their currencies. And then you have a carry. You have a rate differentials, which is another big tailwind for the US dollar. Then a lot of people are talking about the usual US dollar smile, which means that when we are in periods of high uncertainties, the dollar tends to outperform and plays the role of a safe haven, which is even more true now because we have a lack of safe haven. And then the dollar tends to depreciate when we go into that, like sweet spot where things are a bit better. I think that any improvement of the global situation will take a lot of time, which means that I can't see any big collapse of the dollar in the short term. And I think the best case scenario will be a shallow depreciation, but which will be very limited. We saw that despite the Fed pivot, the dollar didn't react. Despite the political turmoil in Washington, the dollar doesn't react. So I think that there is, for the time being, a structural tailwind for the dollar. And I think that it's the consequence as well of the different position of the Fed on one side and the other central banks on the other side. The Fed is the only one who's got a margin of action, and the rest of the crowd will only react. If the Fed is dovish, they become more dovish. If the Fed becomes more hawkish, they will just do nothing. So I think the dollar is quite asymmetrical here. I always come back to 2018 because I think that it was an extraordinary year, and we had so many insights about, I would say, the weakness of the whole setup. We learned in 2018 that any spike or disorderly spike of the nominal curve has spread over to the risk assets. I think that the key for the central banks at the moment, they have become convexity manager. They want to keep the interest rate vol as muted as possible to avoid any spillover to the other asset classes. So I think they will try to keep the nominal curve as stable as possible. This was the aim of the ECB. And to some extent, I think that the Fed is doing the same. In fact, it's just trying to avoid any erratic move of the nominal curve. So which is quite interesting, because if you think that they will try to anchor the nominal curve and the rest of the world is trying to reflate the whole system, That means positive tailwinds for break-evens, which lead us to what, on my strong conviction, it's that real yields will fall further, with the impact, of course, on the precious metal complex. The central banks have not only reinstored the Greenspan put in 2019, but they have also reinstored the Bernanke straddle. The least we can say is that the markets have got the message. You see the interest rate vol is at all-time lows, but it's not only the interest rate vol measure, it's all the asset class vol, we just have collapsed in 2019, which is a proof that the markets think that central banks will be able to keep the whole system very stable, and that we will not go back to another takeaway of 2018. It's what has been the bottom line, in fact. It's we had political uncertainty, but the political uncertainty has not been offset by central banks. They left their usual role of firemen. They were the pyromaniac along with the politicians by tightening and trying to normalize. 2019 is a reversal. This uncertainty will prevail. They are trying to, in fact, become the cornerstone of their stable setup. What did we learn over the last decade? It's QE didn't manage to kick in inflation, real inflation, and didn't generate an above par growth. So it's not a failure if you were long of equities, but for the real economy, it didn't have the expected impact. So I think that more QE is unlikely to achieve what has not been achieved for a decade. So therefore, you can see that there is a need, because we are in some unknown territories, I think there is a global need to rethink the whole setup. And to some extent, when you look at the Fed, they are already in that process with the big conference in June, where they are already trying to reshuffle the inflation targeting concept. If you think that the margin of action from the central banks is at best very limited, plus using the old tools have questionable impact, what is left? What is left is potentially fiscal expansion, but there as well you have a big headwind, which is the already existing debt burden. I think we are ahead of, and especially because we are going into the US elections, of a complete revolution to some extent, and some new theories gaining traction. We are starting to hear a lot about the MMT. I think this will just expand further. For one reason, there is a need from voters to be included in the growth expansion. I think there is anger toward the elites. There is anger toward the politicians, for the traditional politicians. There is rejection of banks and central banks. And there is a rejection of the supply-side economic theories, because for one reason, they didn't have tangible impact for people who are supposed to benefit from it. I think that rate cuts, tax cuts, they don't want to hear about it, because what has been the insight of the tax reform from Trump, it essentially benefited from the happy few. So I think that voters will be very sensitive to a new language. And I don't want to talk about MMT and just debate, is it a scam or what? It's, I think, irrelevant. The key question is, people want to change. We have a rising populism, and you have this need for new theories. And I think this will be the big debate of the US elections. I think this is going to be very destabilizing at the beginning, because what is the center idea of of theories like MMT? It's the intellectual justification of unlimited fiscal expansion and unlimited easy monetary policy. So basically, the governments will spend as much as they can, and there is no issue because the central bank will buy the bonds, and the government will be able to use the proceeds to basically kickstart the economy. I don't think that the central banks are there yet. It's so when we are talking about debt monetization, I'm massively convinced that this is where we are heading toward, but we will have a period of high instability and volatility to go there, because this is a huge mental paradigm shift. And we need to remember that in 2016, when Bernanke went to the Ministry of Finance in Japan, he was telling them, okay, what you should do is just issue as many perpetual as you want, and the BOJ will buy them, and then with the proceeds, you will just drive the economy, the growth expansion. Remember the way it has been received? Everybody was like, yeah, it's a good idea, but we are far from implementing these extreme solutions. So what did we learn? We learned in 2018 that the world is highly addicted to central bank largesse, central bank very transparent communication, and China. So basically, the assumption at the moment is we will go back to the normal setup. 2018 was an abnormal year. Welcome to 2017, everything is safe. I have strong reservations, and I explain why. Secondly, I think that there is something very important. When you look at all the sequence of bubbles and bubble burst since the dot-com crisis. If we assume that the dot-com was a starting point, we've been just driven by centrifugal forces, moving us away from the center, which is home, which is to some extent the safe place. Why? Because to deal with the consequences of each bubble burst, we had to create an even bigger bubble. So to some extent, we are just moving away, and it means that we will need to be even more inventive to deal with the current malaise. So this is why I think the door is open for new economic theories. This is why I think the door is open for more central bank innovation, and which means, when you look at the toolkit at the disposal of the central banks, you have 8 different steps. The BOJ is already at step 6, which is the yield curve control. The ECB is at step 5. The step 8 is the helicopter money. My conviction is this is where we will land. This is not tomorrow's story, but this is where we are heading toward, and I think that we have to be ready for that.